When you hear that phrase, how does it make you feel? For me, it reminds me of that childlike feeling of discovery and curiosity as I scrolled through the Steam page and immediately latched onto this piece of music that I heard. If you haven't played Zero Escape, that was the beginning of Morphogenetic Sorrow. Hearing that back always gives me this sense of warmth behind it. That feeling of launching Zero Escape and playing through the story and hearing a piece of music that just latched onto the soul in a way. Experiencing the story of Junpei and Akane and the many other characters, and just feeling like it resonates on some deep, soulful level. It's quite hard to explain, but at the same time, it just feels like it's meant to be. Now, the tracks I'm going to talk about in this video are not going to be the entire soundtrack of Zero Escape. It's going to be those tracks which had that feeling of resonance with me. When I think of Zero Escape music, there's only so many tracks that come to mind personally, and the answer is going to be completely different to you. When we hear music in games, there's a childlike sense of discovery, especially when attached with a really strong and resonating story. Sometimes it's just the idea of resonating so strongly and relating to a character, and when we hear that theme that seems to connect to that character, we somehow connect it to us. Zero Escape is a really good example of that. What is Zero Escape music? The answer to that question is really subjective. It depends on the individual. To me, the word that I associate with Zero Escape music is something I'll mention at the end. On this channel, I do a lot of analysis videos where I break down pieces of music, I give you the technical details, the music theory, the production, how the composition was made and everything, but on some level it's a bit misleading in a way. Let me explain. Now I could start telling you that that's in D minor, and I could tell you that, oh, the left hand, the harmony is descending down the D minor scale and everything, but those are just words, they don't feel like they mean anything. Last year, I must have composed 30 plus tracks for original projects, games, short films, media projects, etc. And when I sat down in front of a computer to compose, did I really start with what key signature do I want or what tempo do I want the piece to be in? Not really. I thought about what is the emotion and the story that I want to tell through the music. Shinji Hosoe, the composer of Zero Escape, he writes music in such a way that it tells a story. And I want to explore what that story means to me. And I'd love to know what the story means to you. What exactly is Zero Escape music? And I don't mean the technical details of how they're made and everything, but how it actually resonates, how it impacts us. How does it tell the story of Junpei and the various characters across the series through its music? Now, I could talk about a lot of different tracks in Zero Escape. Puzzle themes, I could talk about the more idle themes when you're in the warehouse in VLR. I could talk about the more intense suspense themes, but I'm gonna focus on the tracks that just resonate most with me. And they're gonna be different for you, but you'll see why. Let's start with Morphogenetic Sorrow. I absolutely love lyricism in music, especially when there are no lyrics. Songs which feel like they're singing to you on some level without a word ever being spoken. This melody to me, the thing that screams out to me the most is the simplicity in how the notes connect with each other. There's a flow to the piece of music that kind of speaks to the story and resonates with me on some level. Small movements. Think about what my right hand is doing here. To me, there's this feeling of things feeling comfortable, warm, but gradually getting more complex, gradually becoming harder to follow, but every step is really gentle. My hand didn't move in ridiculous positions or loads and loads of different movements across the keyboard or anything like that. It was small, gentle steps. I remember the feeling of playing Zero Escape 999 for the first time. And it really did feel like a series of small, gentle steps, one by one. I start in the position of, oh my gosh, we're all stuck in a sinking ship. What are we to do here? And gradually, as you're exposed more to the story, it feels like you're gradually learning about a more complex world beyond your imagination. And to me, that melody seems to connect with it so strongly. This idea of things being so gentle, progressively getting more complex over time. Nothing too big, nothing too in your face, but Hosoe is communicating this idea of struggle, desperation, journey, just through the simplicity of the melody itself. It's a really similar thing. We can see a lot of emotional similarities in Morphogenetic Sorrow when we compare that to Bluebird Lamentation. Those small, gentle steps, that gradual exposure to the story. Now, pacing is a really important thing too. These tracks, which are supposed to be the massive centerpiece pieces of music in Zero Escape, we're talking Morphogenetic Sorrow, Bluebird Lamentation, Interminable Dilemma, for example. They don't happen all that often, realistically. 9 Years is another good one. They happen at really pivotal moments across the entire series, and it's kind of like when you're stuck in situations where things are really difficult all the time. You're in a sinking ship, you're in a warehouse you know nothing about, you're in some random facility. It almost feels really, really overwhelming on some level. And naturally you might expect that the series will end, or some massive centerpiece piece of music will be something equally as complex and mysterious, when in reality, it's just so sweet, melancholic, and warm. And warm is the word that comes to mind when I think, what is Zero Escape music? What is it to me? It instills this feeling of warmth inside me. And it's something which almost transcends music theory, because I could try and conjure up an explanation behind it as to how the chords are able to do that, but at the same time, I feel like it's more worthwhile to just say the compositions and the way the music interacts with the story, those are the things that instill this feeling of warmth when listening back to it. In 2015 or so, when I first did an arrangement of a Zero Escape piece of music, Morphogenetic Sorrow, I didn't pick Morphogenetic Sorrow because I thought, oh yeah, this is an easy one to do an arrangement of, or oh yeah, this could sound fun in my own style. I picked it because it actually meant something to me. I thought, I don't want to improve upon the piece of music. The music's already perfect in my eyes anyway. But the music has resonated with me and almost infected, to use that word, my soul. And now I want to communicate the music again, but through my own experiences and from my own eyes. And that's the effect it had on me personally. You could quite easily sing along to that and create your own lyrics to that if you wanted to. Even if you haven't played Zero Escape, I'd almost pause for a second and try and work out what you think the story and the context of that piece of music is. It could mean a lot of things, and on some level, no matter what you say, you're probably not too far off the truth from that. Because it speaks to us, it tells us, it communicates the story and the emotions behind it. Another composer mentioned something to me really recently. This idea that one thing that improved their compositions was removing. When things feel really busy, just remove a few instruments. Listen to the original 9 Years, for instance, and you'll realize it sounds like there's a lot going on, but there actually isn't, especially when played on a piano and really exposing the melody and the harmony, but there isn't much going on, but it's able to communicate so much without saying a lot. And it just goes to demonstrate what the music of Zero Escape is really. It's a series of pieces of music which are able to communicate a lot without necessarily speaking much. The pauses, for example, are such an important thing in pieces like Morphogenetic Sorrow, Bluebird, Interminable Dilemma, Reminiscence. That Latin track, which I always forget the name of. I mentioned pacing earlier, being something which is so part of the Zero Escape identity when it comes to musicality. You start with the really intense puzzle themes, the binary games for example. Then you move on to those more stressful pieces of music like Trepidation for example, that just fill you with kind of an intense anxiety as to what's actually going on here. Then, pacing wise, we have those periods of reflection. We have those periods where we can reminisce about the past or just collect our thoughts, such as Recollection for instance. And eventually, as the pacing kind of goes up again and we start to be introduced to really complex ideas and everything, we start to understand, okay, now that we understand how we're feeling, let's understand the story. And we hear pieces like Digital Root or Who is Zero, for instance, that help to provide this sense of, let's start figuring things out now. And what does that culminate in? It culminates in that period where we actually start to understand what's going on. We start to really connect deeply and strongly to the characters that are in front of us. And in order to connect with those people, we need a piece of music that connects to us. And often it's the simple things that resonate most strongly with us. And it's why Morphogenetic Sorrow plays in the places it does. It's why Bluebird plays in the locations it does as well. There's a lot that could be said about the puzzle themes and how all of them make us feel for very particular reasons. I want to talk about Monitor because that piece just does something to me and I don't know what it is. I think it's the beginning, actually, come to think of it. It's that opening section with the synths and the pads and everything, those dark sounding pads that somehow feel really open and wide and create this feeling of intense fizziness, but at the same time, I sort of want to relax a little bit before getting into the puzzle and actually working out how to get out of the room. There's something about the opening segment with the long-held note, especially when we hear it on the synths as well, that kind of creates this deep feeling within ourselves, inside of us, that's like, oh, okay, something's happening right now. Like, it just doesn't really hit the same if you suddenly were to start moving around. So let me show you what I mean by that. Suddenly I'm kind of like, oh, okay, I should start, this is going to be quite dynamic maybe, I'm going to start moving around a little bit, but just one really long held down sound just kind of pulses and kind of like moves to the beat of our heart in a sense as well. And that creates this feeling of anxiety, but also this feeling of warmth at the same time as well. It's kind of like the emotion behind the piece of music is connecting to the emotion that we're feeling playing the game. And I'm really particular with that phrase, not the emotion that the game wants us to feel necessarily, but how us as the player is feeling as we're trying to solve something. That opening does a really good job of achieving that, and the opening of so many Zero Escapes does the same thing. Acidity is able to do a really similar thing just by playing 2 chords at the beginning of the piece of music. How did that make you feel? To me, just that, without any melody, any other instruments and everything, it kind of gave me this feeling of like, I'm home somehow, but things don't feel the same. It's kind of, if you understand what I mean by that. Kind of like, it sounds familiar, but at the same time, I just can't feel comfortable, and I just can't feel happy listening to that. And there's something kind of deep-rooted in that and so much of the music of Zero Escape, especially because we come across familiar characters, we come across familiar ideas all the time. But still, we just can't get that unsettling feeling outside of our minds while playing the game. That feeling that anything can happen at any moment. I don't know if you relate to this at all, if you've played Zero Escape, but has there ever been a point in the game where you're kind of afraid of what's going to happen next? And like, you know that the game is setting something up. You know that you probably have some ideas of what's going to happen, but at the same time, you just have this unsettled feeling that like, I just feel a bit shaken right now because something's going to happen. I don't really know what or to who. Is somebody going to die? And then it might so be the case that nothing actually happens. Something might endearing happen, like you speak to Luna or something. But at the same time, that feeling never kind of leaves. And hearing things like this really kind of help to influence that feeling of discomfort. I like the contrast of these particular chords. Not to go into too much detail, but they're 7th chords, and despite sounding jazzy, they also just feel naturally quite open. Zero Escape music, to me, is more than just something which acts as a background to the game and the storytelling. The music itself tells a story. I'd love to hear from people who haven't actually played Zero Escape, or perhaps know little about it. I'd love to know what you think of all the things you heard in this video, how they made you feel, what story you think the music is trying to tell. Anyone that's played the game, I'd love to know your thoughts on how it actually did make you feel experiencing it when you played the game. What pieces of music do you think of when you hear of the term Zero Escape? And most importantly, what is that one word that comes to mind when you hear the phrase Zero Escape music? Thanks for watching. I'm really open to doing more of this sort of thing with other game series. Obviously something like a Danganronpa or a Library of Ruina would follow. But I kind of just wanted to tell my experience with the music of a game without necessarily getting too bogged down in the theory and things like that, but instead just asking the basic question of, how did this make us feel? What is the function of this music in this game? And in this case, what is Zero Escape music? Thanks for watching, take care.